That would be one.
Well, you know, I guess the other thing, I'm thinking two things. One is, in Nietzsche, time is not punctual. We're not talking about time as chronology. We're actually talking about what gets brought forward, what resurges, what reconstellates in the course of reformulation. So, and one of the things about him, and one of the reasons affirmation is not simple, or even invention is not simple, invention doesn't simply inaugurate the new ex nihilo, and affirmation is not opposed to the forces of ressentiment and reaction, is that that entire history is still at work, it's still animating, it's still effective. Right, and so the affirmation is precisely of that history, and it's also conditioned by that history. It doesn't fall away with an act of affirmation in the same way that invention emerges out of an experimental method, we might say, that's been chugging along for some time, and that opens or turns or breaks, but it's not the initiation of a radical new that doesn't, in some ways, reconfigure the past and become implicated in it. So, so I think one has to kind of consider, you know, what time is there, if it's not chronological, and you know what invention and affirmation are. That if they're not, if the break we're talking about is a break within a certain kind of recurrent history. The other thing that I thought about that might make this more concrete is that, you know, you're working against, you know, certain notions of science that would be closed systems or completely grounded systems, right? And if they were grounded, they would deny the abyss that opens up by virtue of the necessity to repeat the proof, say. And if they were closed, they would enter into a paranoid economy that would be precisely the opposite of invention, right? And would undermine the actual meaning of experiment. And then, and I thought, okay, closed and grounded systems, I mean, yes, there are ideas of science that are closed and grounded systems. There are ideas of the police state that are closed and grounded systems. The problem with the closed and grounded system, or the specter of its resurgence, is with us, right? It is then, you know, yes, we could find it in certain tracks about scientific methodology in the 19th century, but we get a kind of odd resonance, resurgence, recall, cross-circuiting with other social political impulses to produce closed and grounded territorialities, closed and grounded police states, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, you know, and I think what you're trying to do, you know, with this notion of experiment, and even in your understanding of what I'm calling affirmation, is to try to work in and through that history without allowing it to close, and to also see how it's the abysses or splits or ruptures on which it relies actually produce the possibility for the detours or the pleasures or the new, you know. So, and I'm reminded as well, I think it's Freud on Da Vinci, where he talks about a certain paranoia as being involved in the closing of the system. And then somewhere in one of those case studies on homosexuality, which are so bad, but interesting and perverse, he contrasts paranoia. He says paranoia is the opposite of falling in love. And I think that's kind of great, because I think the other kind of falling, you know, the kind of other break abyss, you know, is that sudden, unexpected, you know, result. And I think that might also link with the love that's in Amor Fati, or, you know, the love of renit, my love of renitency.
You're reading in Judith Cast the Critique of Violence, right? So
Yeah.
the police is a phantom body, right? It's it's everywhere, even where it isn't.
Yes.
So I think I tried to work with that in another but related place called Trauma TV, where I was thinking of television as a policing instrument of sorts. And in every text, I remember even in the beginning of Finitude's score, I suddenly scream out, maybe you think that the way the police have you eating the sidewalks doesn't really interfere with our democratic institutions. So the police, like parabasis or ironic disruption, show up suddenly all the time. This is, remember from last night, the Kafkan, some big figure can show up and deport you in a way. And I guess that happens, that the experiment can suddenly turn on you, or as we discussed in our seminar, that breast can suddenly be an assault weapon coming in and at you and stuffing your orifice. So you see, I think there's this Benjaminian sense that they just suddenly appear, they're suddenly everywhere. I remember when Derrida came to Berkeley first time, and I didn't even see them. He was surprised that there were so many campus police, and we're so used to that. And then he just said, and his wife said, police on a campus when there aren't riots, okay, that we've seen. But there's the kind of policing on so many levels. I've also thought about AIDS a lot, that can appear anywhere and suddenly. And so I don't try to pretend that I'm not being watched and under surveillance. That if I've been outed as anything, it's certainly as a paranoid, anxious thing. So the policing also has everything to do with the relation to law, which is never suspended in a sense, and that can suddenly behave like a SWAT team that's taking something down that you're trying to do, or that is suddenly, even in the space that was noted earlier by Butler, what happened here, what kind of deregulation or regulation is taking place, how would it be responding to or obeying to some sort of legal instigation or injunction. So yeah, you're absolutely right, and they show up all the time because in a Benjaminian way, they're always on your case and in your face. So